All right, thank you so much for joining us today for today's webinar, and we'll go ahead and get started from here. So today's webinar is on driving change in 2026 inside PVA's annual testimony. I just wanted to go over a few overview webinar process for you today. Today's webinar will be recorded and available for viewing on pva.org. Closed captioning is available. Click the CC button in the meeting controls bar at the bottom of your screen to turn it on. And then if you have questions, please type it into the Q&A box. Questions will be answered at the end of the program. First off, I would like to go ahead and have a warm welcome for PVA's National President and Chairman of the Board, Robert Thomas. Robert, would you join us here today?
Thank you, Lisa. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Driving Change webinar. Uh, as you all know, that I will be testifying on March 4th before a joint session of Congress on PVA's priorities for this year. I just want to encourage you all to join us and watch the testimony. Um, and I'm so glad to see that you all have joined us for this webinar. It's exciting to see so many people that take their time and really wants to be a part of PVA's advocacy. So I really appreciate all of you joining us, and I'm sure that Heather and her team with Lisa and Morgan had a whole lot of information that they want to pass out to you. So let's go ahead and clear our minds and just become sponges and absorb all this information that they have for you. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Robert, and it's always a pleasure to have you on. All right, and now I just wanted to go over a few quick things in terms of our overview. So we'll have priority updates with Heather Ainsley, our Chief Policy Officer, and then we'll go over testimony overview with Morgan Brown, our National Legislative Director. I'll have a quick walkthrough of PVA Action Force and ways that you can get involved here with PVA. And then finally, we'll have our Q&A at the end. Heather, I'll go ahead and hand it over to you so you can walk us through our priorities.
Well, thank you, Lisa, and welcome everyone for joining us today. We're very excited to have the opportunity to talk with you about our 2026 policy priorities, which, as President Thomas mentioned, he will be using as he directs his testimony before the House and Senate Veterans Affairs Committees on March the 4th. We want to make sure you understand what we're advocating for, so that way when the opportunity comes, you'll be able to weigh in using our PVA Action Force to bolster the message that will be coming here in Washington, D.C. It's always great for folks to be able to hear directly from their constituents about what's important to them. So Lisa, if we could bring up the PVA website. So we're going to go through our priorities, and we're going to do that today by looking at how to find them on PVA's website and then walking through the document. So if you're on PVA.org, if you go to Veterans and Disability Advocacy at the top, and then you'll see a menu appears, and you scroll down to Policy Priorities. That is where you'll want to go. If you could click on that. That is where we have all of the materials that you need to be able to follow the work that we're doing and to do your own advocacy. So if we could scroll down just a little bit, we will see in our Resource Center, we have our 2026 PVA policy priorities. Below that, you see a few icons that have some information. Those are what we call one-page documents that are about specific bills. So those are some of the things that if you are looking to do some advocacy on the Disabled Veterans Dignity Act, which is a bill we're going to talk about later, and you want to know more about it, you could come to this website, click on that icon, and it would give you a document that you could review, as well as going to PVA Action Force. But if you could scroll up, we're going to spend our time today on the 2026 PVA policy priorities. So if you could click on that, Lisa. So this is our materials that we have that we give to Capitol Hill. Again, it's available on the web, so anybody can have a chance to look at it. But this is where we lay out our priorities for the year. Now, I always want to caution folks that just because you don't see something listed or mentioned doesn't mean we aren't working on it. There are a lot of things that we support, items that we work on, sometimes in coalition with other organizations, sometimes as things pop up that we didn't anticipate that we need to do work on. We have a lot of things that we're keeping in mind. If you ever have questions, you're always welcome to reach out to us. But these are items in this document that we want to keep forward facing, that really reflect some of the items that are key to many of our members and that we think are timely to try to get action on. So we have the front page of the document here, and if you scroll down to the next page, this is where we start talking about our priorities. So the number one priority that we have is strengthening the foundations of VA specialized healthcare services. We know that most of you, maybe all of you, depend greatly on the VA for your care and the specialized healthcare services in particular that VA provides. We know that many of you choose to get your care through the VA because the types of services that are available, particularly for a lifetime, are best provided within the VA. The VA's SCID system of care is a national system of care. Of course, it has what we call a hub and spoke model. A hub is a medical center that has a specific SCID center, and the spokes are medical facilities that might be closer to home that are connected with the hub. And the idea is that you're always able to get care where you need, and then to be able to connect to higher levels of support as you need throughout your lifetime. Unfortunately, we have ongoing problems of chronic staffing deficiencies that we continue to see in the VA direct care system. We continue to see issues with infrastructure deficiencies, places where we have older facilities that have maybe only had some cosmetic or basic renovations, and aren't meeting the way that care is provided today. And we know that having the proper staffing, having the proper infrastructure are really important building blocks to making sure that the system of care remains available. So we are continuing to request that VA look holistically at the system of care to ensure that the individual centers or hubs are properly supported to meet veterans' needs, that they address chronic staffing deficiencies, and prioritize the infrastructure and leasing projects that support some of the unique services that the VA provides, and in particular SCID care. And of course, all of that takes money. So making sure that we have sufficient funding to fully support those specialized services is a key ongoing effort for us. We know that there's a lot happening in terms of reorganization within the Veterans Health Administration. Community care continues to be a growing part of VA. And we know that maybe many of you do get some of your care through the community, but our goal continues to be that the VA system of care is strong and that all the parts of it that our members need is available to them. And we won't click on the link, but at the bottom of that page, you'll see a photo of President Thomas. And that is a place where you can click and go back to some testimony he gave last September before the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee about the importance of the SCID system of care, if you'd like to learn more. Our next priority, if we could scroll down, gets into maximizing the VA long-term services and supports for veterans with SCID. So we know that many of our members have a need for long-term services and supports throughout their lives. And that could be for services in the home or through facility-based care. There are a very limited number of SCID specific long-term care beds within the VA. The map that we have on this page shows for those folks, the darker part is the area west of the Mississippi. And you can see that we have very few long-term care facilities. In fact, one of them that's noted as being in red as a facility is the new San Diego facility that will be isn't quite online yet, but hopefully will be soon. That will be adding some beds. But there's a lot of need and not a lot of beds that are available. So that continues to be something that we are seeking additional support for. You may also remember in the last Congress, we were able to get the Elizabeth Dole 21st Century Veterans Home Care and Benefits Improvement Act passed. And that expanded access to care in the home, care in the community, including the Veteran Directed Care Program. And we want to make sure that all of those programs, including Veteran Directed Care, are available to veterans regardless of where they live, that they can access those programs in a way that allows them to remain in their homes, remain in their communities, and not have to try to find a facility-based care unless that's what they want or need. We don't want anyone to be forced to have to make that decision. Another area of really support in the community is VA's bowel and bladder program. And this is an area where Morgan is going to spend a little more time talking. Some of you are familiar with the bowel and bladder program of the VA. You may use it or know someone who does. And this is a program that helps veterans in the community be able to get those particular needs met. But we continue to hear issues with timely reimbursement, tax treatment of the payments, and just concerns that the processing hasn't modernized as VA continues to figure out how to better work, particularly with caregivers who are family members in providing these services. So we have some legislation that has been introduced to codify that program. And when we say codify, that means just put it into statute and have it be something that Congress officially passes to put this program where it rightfully belongs and to address some of the issues. And then we have some stuff specifically focused on veterans and, of course, caregivers. The program of comprehensive assistance for family caregivers. We are still waiting on regulatory changes that need to be made to make it easier to access that program. And then we also are looking at how we can better support caregivers who are unpaid and providing them with access to credits to Social Security based on their caregiving time. And that's an effort that would be beyond those who are involved in the what we call the PCAFC. It would be available to any caregiver is what we're promoting. If we could go to the next page, we'll get into our third priority, and that is fortifying the financial security of veterans with SCID, their families, and survivors. Here we have VA disability compensation. We want folks to know that we are working to ensure, the core foundations of the system are preserved, and that, if there are actions to be taken, those are done that would eliminate inefficiencies that make it more difficult for veterans, their families, and survivors to get benefits. That is our goal. That is what we are holding the line on. We also have been advocating for increased support for special monthly compensation. That's an additional benefit that a service-connected veteran might be able to receive due to the need for aid and attendance or having a specific type of disability. Again, there is legislation that would make an increase for some folks who do get special monthly compensation. And as we saw earlier, we have a picture here of one of our leaders who's our national treasurer. And you can click and see some testimony he gave in December about a bill that would increase not only special monthly compensation, but also survivor benefits. And we'll talk about those in a moment. Next is employment. We know that finding employment, obtaining employment, keeping employment continues to be a struggle for many folks with catastrophic disabilities. We're trying to focus a little bit on VA's Veteran Readiness and Employment Program, making sure that they have the resources so that their counselors can spend time with veteran clients and help them through the process. So that they can be able to get the support they need to return to work if that's what they would like to do and are able to do. We also want to make sure that the program that veterans using the VRE program are able to get the same supports that veterans do in other education programs. On the next page, we continue to talk about fortifying the financial security. And once again, we have accessible housing. We know that's a problem for many folks. And the VA's Home Improvements and Structural Alterations Grants Program continues to be an area that we want to see raised. It has not been raised since 2010, and we know that prices have certainly increased since then, and that benefit needs to be improved. Survivor benefits. As I said earlier, there is some legislation that we support that would provide what we're calling a down payment, a small increase in disability. I'm sorry, the what we call the DIC benefit for survivors. Right now, the survivors are not they don't get the same level of support that a survivor of a federal employee does in terms of financial support, and we don't think that's right. So we are advocating for improvements there. We're also continuing to advocate that the surviving spouses of veterans with ALS should be able to get the what we call the DIC kicker. It's an additional amount that's available depending on how long an individual lives with a service-connected disability. The requirement is 8 years to get that additional benefit, but the life expectancy of someone with ALS is typically 3 to 5 years. And so that's a wrong that we want to correct. On the next page, we have our final of the veteran VA specific categories, and that is increasing SCID veterans access to healthcare services, transportation to get to VA, the AAE program. Basically, all things transportation continues to be an issue that we hear an awful lot about, whether it's mileage rates, whether it's contractors that are supposed to help you get to appointments, or even more recently, some have been affected by changes to buying of airfare for folks who have to fly to get care. That's an area where you're going to be hearing a lot about in President Thomas's testimony. We also continue to support helping disabled veterans grow their families, including access to services like IVF and other assisted reproductive technologies. And then our women veterans with SCID, we know, of course, more women veterans than ever are using VA healthcare, and we want to make sure that women veterans in general, but specifically those with SCID, have access to the comprehensive gender-specific care that they need, and that has a high standard of care, providing for their safety and dignity. And we want to ensure that all VA and community care clinicians who are serving this population adhere to the evidence-based clinical practices that are available, and of course that facilities are accessible so folks can access them and get the care they need. On the last page, we have a few of our broader focused efforts related to equal opportunity full participation for our members as people with disabilities. So we continue, obviously, to look at a lot of issues related to the Americans with Disabilities Act, and once again, transportation. So looking at the surface transportation, that's everything on the ground: buses, trains, roads, bridges, sidewalks. Things that often can cause problems for people with disabilities in accessing their communities. And on the very last page, air travel, another form of transportation, of course, but air travel is something that continues to be an issue that we're working on. So the first four categories I talked about will be the ones that'll be the focus of President Thomas's testimony, while in general, these are the priorities that we have overall for this year as an organization. As I said, if there were items that that we have supported in the past, that just because we didn't talk about them doesn't mean they're not still something we're working on. There are a lot of things that the team does work on and tries to move forward on a regular basis. But these are just some of the things that we wanted to highlight for you today. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Lisa, and she's going to move to the next part of our program.
Thank you, Heather. Now I'm going to be joined with Morgan Brown, and we'll go ahead and go over what's going to be covered in our testimony coming up in March. Morgan, thank you so much for joining me.
Yep, happy to be here.
Um, so I had a few questions, Morgan, for you in terms of what the testimony would be about. And first thing I wanted to ask was, could you tell us what the joint hearing is, and then who will be testifying, as well as important, why the joint hearing is important to PVA members?
Sure. Well, we'll try to take those in order. Um, the joint hearings, this has been a long-standing tradition of the Veteran Affairs Committees, where the two committees come together, usually in one room, and they hear the legislative presentation from, it used to be the congressionally chartered organizations, of which PVA is one of them. Now it's the organizations that Congress believes are, the most effective advocates for um, for veterans in like a particular area. So, like for PVA, it's veterans with spinal cord injuries or disorders. This year's hearing is going to be just a little bit different. It seems like every year they kind of mix things up. It's going to be conducted on 3 separate days, which is something they've done in the past. But unlike in the past, that first day is actually going to be two panels. And each of the 3 days, it'll be one of the largest VSOs and then seven additional VSO organizations. So on February 24th is the first hearing. Congress will hear the presentation from our friends at the Disabled American Veterans. And I'm not going to list all seven, but it also would include a presentation from Military Officers Association of America and Gold Star Wives in that panel, on that second panel. On the 3rd of March, they will hear the legislative presentation of VFW in the first panel, and then Student Veterans of America, Blinded Veterans Association, and Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America will be among the 7 VSOs that are testifying that day. And then finally on March 4th, where President Thomas is going to be testifying, the American Legion will go first in that the first panel. And then organizations like AMVETS, our very good friends at the Wounded Warrior Project, the Tragedy Assistance Program for Survivors, will join President Thomas in that second panel. So, to answer your question, Lisa, about the importance of this particular hearing, this is a way for organizations like Paralyzed Veterans of America you could almost say to like put a marker down, here are our top priorities, and then be given the time to explain each in detail, not necessarily through the oral presentation, but through the written statement, which is rather lengthy compared to many of the other statements that we provide to Congress, which are limited to, in the case of the House, 10 pages or less.
Excellent. So I understand you're working with President Thomas to prepare his written testimony. Could you give our listeners a glimpse in the level of effort that goes into preparing PVA's annual legislative presentation?
Yeah, so in reality, the preparation for this hearing started the day after last year's hearing. Certainly, there have been some new concerns that have been raised or identified, and we've been able to expand some of our concerns. So that's part of the process, kind of capturing what's going on, identifying additional needs, and in good years, we're able to, when Congress takes action and allows us to remove items from our legislative priorities list, then of course we can drop those off, and that makes room for other things. As we get a little closer, like in the December timeframe, that's when we're beginning to look at what was it that President Thomas presented to Congress last year? How relevant is it? What are the key issues? We had that discussion with him. What are the key issue areas that we want to identify in the next joint hearing. And now we're in the drafting stage. Um, not quite not quite finished with the draft, but we're getting pretty close. We got a couple other issue areas that we're still working on, and but I hope to wrap that up by the end of the day, and we can get into the editing process, and then sit down with President Thomas and fine tune it before it's delivered to the committee next week.
And could you tell us more about what will be covered in the PVA testimony?
Sure. So, well, Heather walked you through the each of the major priority areas, and the way we structure our statement is we follow that a similar format. So, in the case of strengthening the foundations of VA specialized care, President's going to talk about staffing vacancies. To go back to some of the preparation that goes into the statements. Did a little research yesterday evening and determined that for the past, I don't know, 12 years, either President Thomas or one of his predecessors has identified staffing as a concern. So that's a point that President Thomas will be bringing out in his testimony. He will give a summary of the state of the SEID centers. It's an opportunity to educate members of Congress on what the SEID system is and why it's important. He'll talk a little bit about some of the ongoing construction projects and what their status is. We'll talk about the need to prioritize facilities that provide SEID care, and the need for additional funding so that we can both increase staffing, but then at the same time, repair some of the existing facilities, or ideally, in many cases, simply build a new SEID center. After that, he'll talk a little bit about access to residential rehabilitation for veterans with substance abuse disorders. And then he will jump into the next key area, which is talking about maximizing access to VA long-term services and supports. Here, we'll again cover the need to increase available bed space in VA's long-term care centers. And then we'll start talking a little bit about the implementation of the Elizabeth Dole Act. That's the legislation that lifted the cap on care through the Veteran-Directed Care Program and expanded it to all VA medical facilities. And it also expanded other programs, homemaker home health, home-based primary care, and purchase skilled care, that, to the best of our knowledge, VA hasn't actually done that yet, and President Thomas will certainly encourage the committee members to look into that and maybe give us a little bit of insight in what's going on. He will talk about the direct care workforce shortage throughout the country and how that impacts our members, and then make a couple of recommendations on how these committees, and in particular Congress, could make the situation a little bit better for veterans. He will talk about the caregiver program. As you know, we've been waiting for quite some time now for VA's proposed rules to improve the program to come out. Actually, it was December of 24, I think, when that was released. And to date, the administration still has not come back and indicated what they're going to do. So he'll talk about that and the impact on our members. He'll talk about codifying the bowel and bladder program, which I'll talk a little bit more in a minute about. And then we jump to fortifying the financial security, and here's where he'll talk about increasing SMC rates for our members. And then we will talk about, he'll touch on concurrent receipt. He'll talk about increasing dependency and indemnity compensation for survivors. We will talk about access to healthcare services, which is the next major priority, of which we've highlighted three, and actually there's four in his written statement, four transportation related issues that are have an adverse impact on our members that we would like to see Congress fix. He'll touch on IVF, and while that may not be everything that's in his final written statement, that gives you a pretty good idea of what to expect once it's finalized.
Excellent. And so Heather earlier, she had foreshadowed there are currently two bills of particular importance to us, the Sherry Briley and Eric Edmondson Veterans Benefit Expansion Act and the Disabled Veterans Dignity Act. Could you take a moment to explain what these two bills are and why they're so important to us?
Sure. So first and foremost, the Veterans Benefits Expansion Act is HR 6407. There's currently only a House version of the legislation. This is something that we've been working on since last summer with the House Veterans Affairs Committee. And in simplest terms, the legislation raises SMC rates for some veterans and the baseline rate of DIC, which is currently about 60 cents shy of $1,700 a month. So, as many of the listeners on this call know, SMC is arguably one of the most important benefits that veterans with severe service-connected disabilities can receive. The extreme nature of the disabilities incurred by veterans in SMC, you can't make up for that. You can't compensate for that. But this particular benefit will at least provide these veterans an opportunity to have additional financial resources to accommodate their individual needs. So the provisions in HR 6407 would increase SMC by $10,000 a year for veterans receiving SMC R1, R2, and T. The $10,000 would go a long way towards, we believe, rebalancing special monthly compensation to make sure that it more closely matches the true financial need that the veterans who are currently receiving the benefit really could use. And just so you know, so SMC, we don't know how long ago it was that the baseline rates were established. So it's important that you recognize the fact that this opportunity, that this could be a life changing event in the event that Congress were to approve that. So at the same time, DIC is intended to provide protect survivors against impoverishment after the death of a service-connected veteran. There's a precipitous drop-off for many surviving spouses when the veteran passes, literally in thousands of dollars of income coming into the home will cease to come once VA ends the veteran disability compensation and SMC if they were receiving it. That financial cliff, when it happens, we have had members or surviving spouses who have had their homes foreclosed and they were forced to move in with other family members or friends simply because that precipitous drop off in income was too much for them to account for because it does occur so suddenly. As Heather mentioned before, the legislation that I'm talking about here, which is HR 6407, it's a second provision that's in the bill. It's an initial down payment on what's truly owed to veterans and survivors. And we're committed to closing the entire gap, which is currently, I guess, about 12% as compared to other federal survivor benefit programs. This particular provision would raise the baseline rate of DIC by about a 1.5% over a period of 2 years. And this increase would be in addition to the annual cost of living allowance in the event that there is one. I mentioned we didn't know when the baseline rate for SMC was established, but we do know it's been 33 years since the one for DIC was adjusted. And I've been working the Hill for nearly 26 years. This is the first legitimate effort I have seen to raise rates for both benefits. The House Veterans Affairs Committee okayed the bill last week, so it's now headed to the House floor. President Thomas is going to remind the committees that for decades, the veterans community has been urging Congress to strengthen both of these critical support programs. And increasing SMC and DIC would be an important first step in helping our most severely disabled veterans and their survivors. So he's going to urge them to pass this important legislation, and I trust that he will convey our expectation that we expect their action to be swift. So regarding the other bill, veterans with spinal cord injuries and disorders face many lifelong challenges, and unfortunately, one of them is neurogenic bowel and bladder dysfunction. Both conditions profoundly impact health, independence, quality of life, and managing the neurogenic bowel and bladder is costly, unrelenting, and requires specialized attention and caregiver support. So veterans that currently qualify for VA's bowel and bladder program may receive that care through a home health agency, a family member, or an individually employed caregiver. In this case, if you're eligible for it, and I'll just say use like the family member as the example, they would provide that care. They're required to account for their hours, submitted on a sheet in a rather archaic manner to VA, and then in some cases they're waiting months to be reimbursed for the care. So we already know, and I know I'm speaking, I guess, to the choir in this case. Current program is fraught with problems, and it's also unevenly applied across the VA system. And the one thing we hear most from members is that timely reimbursement and then the tax treatment of payments. The Disabled Veterans Dignity Act, S 3647, will help some of these problems. This is something we've been working on for a couple of years. The bill was recently introduced by Chairman Moran of the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee. It's going to make VA's bowel and bladder program a statutory requirement. It's going to force VA to standardize their processes, training, and procedures across VA for this program. It's going to clarify participation criteria, reimbursement rates, and the frequencies. And something else that the current program doesn't allow for is basically establish some semblance of an appeal process by requiring a reveal of any denial by one of VA's 25 SEID centers. President Thomas is going to tell the committees that passing this legislation would resolve most of the existing pain points experienced by family members who perform B&B care. And again, our expectation that Congress pass this bill as soon as humanly possible.
Both incredibly important bills. Now you've covered a lot today. Is there anything that we have not covered that you feel is important that we discuss?
Just two things that are kind of related to the whole legislative process and this annual event. It's extremely important that Congress hears from members about the two bills that I just discussed, and frankly, all the others that we have identified through PVA Action Force on the PVA website. So we're hoping that chapters will steer their members to PVA Action Force prior to the hearing and encourage their members, if they haven't sent in a letter, or if it's been some time since they sent in a letter on an issue, to please do so. This is important because, at least as far as the members of the Veterans Affairs Committees go, if they start receiving letters on an issue that President Thomas discusses either in his written statement or his oral, it's probably going to resonate more, and it'll linger with them longer if they're hearing from constituents about them. I'd also like to mention that in addition to the president's testimony, members of the executive council will be here meeting with congressional members that serve on the Veterans Affairs committees and hopefully the appropriations committees um, the day prior and the day after the hearing, just to help reinforce the message and drive our points home.
Perfect. It sounds like a lot of great information and a lot of important things that our members need to take and take to heart. Thank you so much, Morgan. And thanks for highlighting the PVA action force. So I'll go ahead and share my screen with you here in a little bit so I can show you how to go about going and doing that. Let's see here. So if I go ahead and jump you back into our website here, and I'm going to take you back to our homepage. So if you're on our homepage with PVA.org and you go up to Veterans and Disability Advocacy, and then on the drop down, if you follow it to PVA Action Force, that will take you to our system where you're able to do advocacy efforts from basically from your either your mobile, from your cell phone, or from an iPad or a laptop. And so pull down here, sometimes it may not show up. So you can also, if it loads, you can go there, or you can also hit that button and it'll go a workaround way for it. But there are all of our bills that we have here that we would love for you to help lend your voice and advocate for us as well as we have some petitions as well. But one of the ones that Morgan had mentioned, the ensure consistent bowel and bladder care for SCID veterans, I'll click on that one just to show you and walk you through how you would go about it. But if you click on it here and you scroll down, it just covers essentially what this bill is, who has bills right now. So if there's one in the House, if there's Senate, if there's both, why it is important, particularly to PVA. We always have our position on there and why we think that it's important for our members or our supporters, family members, anyone who cares about and supports the things that we care about, are able to write out to their representatives, their senators, their of their district representatives of their districts and lend their voice as to why this should be looked at. So if you come over to the right-hand side, you can go ahead and put your information. There's a place where you can add more and kind of share your own story and why this bill is particularly important to you. And then we also have the written out portion that is already sent out to them. You can look at it and edit any of this information, as well as for those who already have sponsored or co-sponsored the bill, instead of requesting that they sign on, it sends them a thank you letter just to let them know that you appreciate your support and you expect their continuing support as it makes its way onto the House and Senate floors. And then enter your information. So if you put in your information, so your prefix, first, last name, email, you can sign up for text alerts if you'd like, or and then put your mobile number in if you prefer that. We also just kind of ask about caregiver and members. That doesn't really affect or say anything for the representatives themselves. It's just for our internal information. So if, Morgan or his team is meeting with people on the Hill, then it'll let them know, we have this many, caregivers or this many members who wrote about this issue and why it's important. It kind of quantifies why we're doing what we do, as well as put your home information. So this way it'll help you find the senators and the representatives that this letter is going to go to. So once you put in that information, and you can click for updates. If you're already signed up for updates, just unclick it because I think you may get an error message, and then you can just send your message. It's pretty easy, pretty quick. You don't necessarily have to put in and edit any of the information if you don't want to, if it's important to, but you don't have the energy necessarily to lend, your personal story, but you're just wanting to lend your support. You can do that, and it's incredibly helpful. But these are just a few of the ways that you can go about it and use your voice. We also have a petition on there as well to help protect the SCID centers at the VA. The bill of the benefits bill that Morgan had mentioned, as well as a myriad of other bills that are important that will help us out. So with that, I'll stop sharing, and then I'm going to go ahead and go to our Q&A and jump in and see some of the questions that we have here. If I can go ahead and run these down. So we have a question asks, how long must a member wait to send another letter? So within our PVA action force, if you have sent a letter on that particular issue, it will not allow you to send another one since you already sent one. But there are other ways that you can get involved too. You can message the individual, you can call them. So if you go onto PVA Action Force on the right-hand side, when I walked you through, um, not in the letter, but on the first portion of it, it can help you find your representative, and then that'll give you their number so you can call their office and you can reach out to them that way. So not only are you sending a letter, you can call them and let them know what is important to you. And then also social media. So if you have their Facebook or their Twitter or Instagram or any of their social media platforms, and you message them and let them know, that's another way that you can lend your voice as well. So there's a lot of ways that you can get involved. And thank you for that was a great answer or great question, excuse me. All right, we also have another question that says, can you explain the current tax situation as it relates to bowel and bladder program benefits and payments and how we can help to resolve this issue? I believe, Morgan, would you like to join me on screen and answer this question?
I can take a stab at it. And then Heather, if you want, you can jump in after me. So currently the payments that are received through the bowel and bladder program are taxable. This is, I guess you could say PVA's position is that since the provider of the B&B care is performing basically this service in a caregiver role, the payment should be non-taxable in the same way that payments are non-taxable through the program of assistance or whatever for PCAFC, the caregiver program. And so our hope is to be able to convince Congress to change that, make those payments non-taxable. Now the bill here, HR, I'm going to back up here just so that I don't give you the wrong bill number. HR 6407 does not currently contain language addressing the tax issue. We are working with the House on a similar measure, which we believe will include that language, and the Senate has already told us that they'd be willing to adopt it. In the event that this bill comes up for a legislative hearing in the Senate before the House gets around to dropping their bill, that is certainly something that we're going to identify as a shortfall with the Senate in an effort to get them to include it in theirs as well.
Thank you. So I have a question here about what actions are being discussed to increase the financial situation for a non-service connected community. Heather or Morgan, would either of you be able to answer this one?
I can jump in on that one, and Morgan, you can add as needed. There are several things that we talked about that would provide assistance to non-service connected veterans. In the transportation space, we didn't necessarily go into it in depth, but some of the transportation supports are those that would help non-service connected veterans be able to get to care and also to receive help through the medical benefits package with some vehicle adaptations. That's one of the pieces of legislation we're supporting, the Assist Act. On the housing side, the HISA bill that we mentioned is what we're looking at would increase the benefit significantly. It would increase the benefit for everyone, but particularly non-service connected veterans, which would be helpful because those individuals may not be eligible for the larger special adaptive housing grants. And then the caregiver supports that we mentioned under the Elizabeth Dole legislation and implementing that's based on medical need, not based on service-connected status. So there are several different I guess, support areas that we're looking to try to increase that would help non-service connected veterans still be able to get, additional supports as well as helping maybe to alleviate some of the financial pressures that those folks face. But we are very aware of the needs of our non-service connected veterans and do continue to look for additional ways that we can support them.
Mhm. Yep, I have nothing to add to that.
Um, Heather, I think this was from earlier when you're covering the policy priorities there, asking about the map. Why doesn't the map show the care deserts in eastern half of the country? We have extreme lack of dedicated long-term care beds here in the southeast.
So that's a great question. And it's simply we were trying to showcase in a more limited area some of the parts of the country where there are still huge deserts and some projects that are being put in place. But we definitely know that the entire country is basically a desert in terms of having access to this. And in President Thomas's testimony, and anytime we talk about this, we talk about the limited number of beds. There are less than 200 in the entire country that are VA SCID specific long-term care beds. So we are very aware of that. And do make sure that folks know there's no area that is not suffering from the lack of support. So that is please know that that is something that we are focused on, just even though it wasn't specifically highlighted there.
Thank you, Heather. Um, Morgan, so earlier you had mentioned there was the written testimony and the oral testimony. Could you just quickly discuss like what is the difference for those two and why do we have both?
Oh, sure. Sure. The written testimony is literally like PVA's position, written position on a whole host of issues in those priority areas that Heather and I discussed. Um, but in terms of the oral, so there's going to be 7 members on the panel. And so due to time constraints, President Thomas is limited to 5 minutes to basically draw out key points out of his oral statement, and to highlight those. So it is an opportunity, it is considered to be a second statement. And oftentimes there may be, emerging issue, a new development, some sort of a change on the world stage, that gives you a second opportunity, almost like a reattack to bring something else up, that a critical issue that may be affecting the veterans community. So, long story short, the written statement is that comprehensive document, and the oral statement is simply the national president's opportunity to highlight some of the most important issues out of that written statement.
Perfect, thank you. So I do have a question here, is just asking about the PVA action force when I was showing the letters earlier. And I just wanted clarification that it's okay to not add a personal note, and just to make sure that that's okay. And it's, if they feel that it's a little bit too much work, and absolutely, it's okay that you do not add a personal note. Some days, you have a lot going on and you maybe just don't have the energy. I have MS myself, and so some days I can barely brush my teeth or feed myself. And so, if I am able to do those things, or if I'm able to just send a letter, that's a win in and of itself. Some days, maybe you don't have any personal notes to add to it, then that's okay too. Just the simple fact of sending a letter is um, more than substantial, and it's incredibly important and helpful to us, even just clicking it and sending it, because it just shows your support and it tells your representatives and your senators with a constant note that this is important to me and this is something that you should listen to, especially because you are the one that's voting these individuals in. They represent your interests, and so they have to be supporting and doing the things that are important to their constituents and who they represent. So no, if you do not add a personal note, that is no fault. Anything is amazing and is helpful. So thank you for that. Um, let's see here. So
So I'd like to take that question from Jeff about visiting his congressman.
yes,
Um,
absolutely.
Absolutely. If you have the opportunity to visit the congressman, even after you've sent a letter or maybe called the office, please do so. Constituents that show up in the office or ask to meet with a congressional member, they tend to be serious about the issue, and they also tend to be um, voters, and Congress understands that. So definitely your message will go much further if you take the time to visit your congressional member.
Perfect. And Jeff said thank you. Let's see here. I did hear that this question is, I did hear that the caregiver did, excuse me, did I hear that the caregiver program is non-taxable income?
Mhm. Yep, that is correct. It's non-taxable. Both IRS and VA classify the stipend as a benefit or reimbursement rather than income. And they view it as similar as VA disability compensation, which is also non-taxable.
Perfect. Okay, and it looks like we have one more question here. I understand that the VA is working on AAE/SC and AAE NSC. Any progress on the potential changes?
So that's AA and E service connected and non-service connected. Um, there hasn't been a lot of activity in this area. There is some legislation looking to take a look back to the provision of assistance provided to non-service connected veterans. You may recall was passed in legislation, I believe it was 2 years ago. It is one of the bills that we have identified, I believe, on PVA Action Force that would change the language slightly because the way that VA was interpreting it, um, I can't remember if it said that it had to be a van and you may have some people that are in a car or whatever. Um, they wanted the change, and this was a change that VA requested to change the language to vehicle so that it didn't inhibit them from providing that assistance to veterans. So that's the only initiative currently that's affecting the non-service connected veteran community at the moment.
Thank you, Morgan. All right, so we are at the top of the hour. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and conclude today's webinar. If you have any questions or anything that you'd like to share, you are welcome to reach out to us. You can reach me at my email, lisae@pva.org, Morgan at morganb@pva.org, or Heather at heathera@pva.org. With that, thank you so much for joining us, and we hope you have a great day.